Welcome to the J3U University Podcast. I'm your host, John Jewett.
And I'm your co-host, Luke Miller.
Our mission is to elevate the physique coaching standard
and to bring the highest level of competitor to the stage.
Let's jump into today's episode. Peak week secrets, what most get wrong. It is peak week season and mistakes get made, shows gets lost, physiques miss the mark. And so this is, I think, Luke and I, for ourselves, the bread and butter of what we really shine for in J3U, of creating a methodical approach that takes back control of your peak week and stops rolling the dice or the diazide or whatever you want to gamble with, and gives you a structured framework to create decisions that lead you to, on show day, being able to execute a plan and not just hoping to wake up looking reasonable for stage. So Luke and I are going to kind of walk through a few of these things that really stand out, mistakes made, and how to rectify those mistakes. So let's jump in, Luke. How are you doing? A lot of peak week happening.
Yeah,
for you too.
I know this won't come out for a while, but we're already 4 pro cards deep this year with the team. So that's a nice feeling. It's a nice feeling. I think one of the biggest things that's underlooked when you look at how we manage these variables is how calm the coach can stay, knowing what's going to happen. The way that you manage yourself and react to things and provide feedback to the client can largely affect their stress input or their stress output as well. And when you have it set up like we do and you fully know you can move the physique whatever direction you want based on the decisions you make, makes life like so much less stressful and like calm, and you don't like affect the client negatively. And I think that's an overlooked aspect of this. It's not even on our sheet for today, but like before you dive into the nuts and bolts of how to run a peak week, it's like, man, it's so important to just execute as a coach and not affect the client negatively. And by doing it this way, you can do that.
No, that's very true. Like when I was first competing and getting exposed to peak week by other coaches, you know, you get to this point where you're like, all right, you look like you're ready. And then it's like, all right, peak week starts here. And I was so excited for peak week because for one, it was kind of mystified in that something amazing was going to be happening. I yet to have things go like terribly wrong for me. That was later to come. To where there was a point then too, where you're like, man, all right, how do I figure out this peak week once mistakes had been made? And I'd seen those, to where peak week was no longer kind of a excitement thing. It was like, how do you not mess it up these last few days? And that created a lot of stress around me trying to assess and figure it out. And what should I do? What should I not do? And now, like, you know, fast forward with our clients, it's almost kind of lackluster when you get to your peak week, because It's like, all right, you're looking ready. We're starting to reverse the process, and there's not going to be this big radical change that most of us are making at all. And I think that can open the eyes of a lot of clients, because I get a lot of clients that they want the radical thing, right? Of like, here we go. Like, this is when I'm going to like really mutate, and it's not there. But I've have so many people when you're kind of leading into this peak week and we're looking at the various looks and you're like, you could walk on stage just like this. And they're like, yeah, that would be awesome. And then we see that every single day, to where by the time we do end up on show day, it's a very controlled thing, and they're confident in what they're bringing. They've already seen like glimpses of that. And so I think it does remove a lot of the stress, and also just the planning piece for them. Because I know it shows there's a lot, and I'm kind of going maybe in depth of what we might be discussing here, but there's a lot of outside variables that can change, right? Like scheduling. And when you have a program protocol that's already moving parts on top of a moving schedule, it just feels like there's a loss of control on the client side. So if we have like a plan that's already been pretty figured out, when the environment starts changing or things shift around, it's not as dynamically alarming for the client either. But
yeah,
anyway, you're completely right. I think that's a great framework of the improving the psychological stress reduction that can take place. But, I think this gets into the real role, right? A peak week is refining and not getting to a fixing point of view, which sometimes it happens. But I think if you want to kind of lead us away, Luke, on, what is our overarching frame or goal of what we're looking to peak week when we have getting that client skinned out, they're lean, they're ready. What should that look like from there?
Yeah, so for me, it's a matrix system, right? It's like, how can I keep these variables as consistent as possible to produce a change in the physique that I want to see, to move it towards the target look? And a lot of times that matrix is like X amount of food, X amount of fluid will hold weight, X amount of food, X amount of fluid will jump weight, X amount of fluid, X amount of food will pull weight down. And you do this kind of based off like how things go throughout the peak week, and you kind of understand where that's at. And we have some fun stuff coming out for y'all soon, kind of centered around this. But a lot of times you want to avoid some of the classical errors of like panic button changes. So panic button changes are going to be like massive refeeds, or trying to plug in a ton of food last minute, or overcutting water because you're worried about someone being a little bit full or spilled over. These last minute changes type of things. And if you have this matrix that I build for every client going into a peak week, what ends up happening is you can assess where the client's at. You can know when they have to go on stage, and you know where you need them to be the night before bed. And this comes from weight tracking through the week. If any of you guys have seen my chart, I have a chart that does like fasted, a post-workout / time around stage weight, and then a pre-bed weight. And I track that all week. I know where they need to go to bed. I know where they need to wake up. And I know, based on where they wake up, what food amount's going to jump them or hold them based on where they wake. So even if they wake up a bit fuller, a pound heavier, no panic. I just go to the lower side of the matrix, right? And building this matrix, I think, is the big thing. And I think if we can start to build the matrix, then you just have so much control.
Absolutely, because hopefully they don't figure out they could take the red or blue pill and escape the matrix back into past. Sorry, I just had to plug that. Or take both pills. Anyway, no, you're right. Like I do the same thing. Obviously, we're probably doing the same things. But we give you all this in the J3U level 1. We have our peak week lectures, and we give you a lot of these tools that we're talking about. But around that time, 7-10 days out, I shoot this over to my clients that lay out, it's, like a sheet document day by day. It'll have different body weights that I want tracked. And with those body weights, I'm getting their visuals too. So I usually want a fasted, like a post-workout. A lot of times I'll do like a pre-last meal and then a last meal, the pre-bed as a start point. So I can see some various looks throughout the day. And then I'll also have like their diet in there. I'll lay out the training. So they're going to know ahead, because a lot of people bring up, what should I train on this day, or I'm traveling on this day. So like that's already mapped out. Fluids and sodium are documented on this. So every day I can see like what's being done, their steps as well. And then we have another document too, that once we get even close to the show, we'll break this out meal by meal. So I'll have a chart by weights by meal, 30 minutes before every meal. I'll have their fluids laid out, like Luke's talking about. Like we want this all to be consistent on the same page here. So if you're doing 6.5 liters per day, I have in this document, like before meal 1, 500 mils, with meal 1, X amount, between each meal, this amount. So we know exactly the consistency that needs to happen to be able to be repeatable day to day and assess these visuals. And that starts the framework to be able to then have the data to make these decisions, and without making hasty decisions. And I think that's where we get into these classic errors, is where they come from, is not having this matrix present, to where you don't have a clear of a understanding of why a change happened. And then you're reactive to that change, potentially for the wrong way. Example of this, the panic refeed. You have a client, they wake up 2 days out, let's say. They have a 2.5 pound weight drop. oh no, like they're getting like, and maybe even their weight for that day is not coming up as high. Like they're starting to like speed up. I need to put more food in. And that's when you have like, well, what would they be doing for the refeeds? Well, I'll repeat that. Then one day out, they wake up even spilled. You're like, oh no, like I shouldn't have done that refeed. That was way too much. Now you're cleaning them up on one day out. And if you had this matrix and you could look back on how their weight was changing throughout the day, 3 days out, then also looking back over their diet of what maybe you changed, you could have a clear picture to assess and create a proper protocol. I have people that drop like this, overnight. And a lot of times it's because we like made a fiber adjustment. Mm-hmm. And that's documented. And then we have, bout BMs happen or whatever it may be, to where I can clearly say, here's where that weight drop came from. And this is the decision. Sometimes that might be more food. Other times it's do nothing. And we just had that weight range we work in for what we want for the look, just adjust down now. And we have a new fasting starting point. So that's like part of where we see some reactivity of like increasing more food. Same thing goes the opposite in the spectrum, right? Like we have someone wake up heavier.
Oh yeah. And
they look softer. And a lot of times like, oh man, okay, well we need to start maybe one day out, we should probably pull water, or it might prompt the diuretic use.
Yeah.
It's like, well, if you can't say like, why did their weight jump? And that root issue should be the one that you're addressing over symptom chasing. And that's what we don't want to be doing on peak week. We always want root cause and address that versus just the side effects. Because if you're addressing side effects, that root cause could very well still be working in the background and you could be compounding the problem. So the matrix begins all of this process.
I think there's a component of this, and I see these mistakes made kind of throughout the last portion of the peak, is like the assessment piece is not done very well because they don't understand that the matrix that they may have built is not truly religious to those body weights. Like you got to take into account like the fatigue drop and the fiber drop, and knowing that we're going to drop some GI weight. And the worst one is when you go get the tan. And we all know this. Like you take the natty photos when you're like pale and you got the sunlight coming in and you look shredded and it's just like you can see everything. And then you go get your coats of tan on and you're in some crappy hotel lighting and it's dark outside. So you're like doing the hallway lighting, or, even your ring light that you have isn't quite bright enough for the consistent setup for check-in photos that you typically do. And coaches then react to that because of the layers of tan that are on there. And
it makes you look dull.
It looks dull, right? And so this is another thing that's like sticking to your guns. Like when you do this and you build out this matrix, instead of being reactive, like you can know, okay, this weight is ideal. It's exactly where he was yesterday. And I know that if I just keep down this path, he's going to go to bed at this weight and he's going to wake up here and I'm going to have a physique on stage. It's perfect. And I need to not react to the fact that somebody got 1, 2, 3 layers of tan on and just doesn't have enough lighting to show it. And I can't tell you how many times, like, you get excited for clients and you want to post 3 hours out, 2 hours out photos because you're like excited and you want to put it on your story or whatever. But then you get them and you don't put them up because like they look 100 times better than these check-in photos and you just want to wait for them to get on stage. It's like, this is part of that assessment piece, is like having that matrix allows you to stick to the fact that even just like changes in environment, like getting check-in photos when you go do your tan, like you're going to be taking it in different lighting. And that's a part of the assessment piece that I think is huge in the peak week process that matrix can really support.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to today's podcast. Are you struggling to hit your peak on show day? Feeling lost in the off season? Upgrade your coaching game with J3U University. Our program covers everything from off season to contest prep to peak week, all based from real client results. Along with our comprehensive physique curriculum, you'll also get access to our 4 rooms with our J3U team to answer any questions you have, and live Q&A sessions to further your coaching and athlete experience. We are the source of education for top IFBB pros and coaches. Join us to elevate the coaching standard at J3U University. Let's get back to today's podcast. we have a cool visual in our level 1 lectures where I show you, like, these are some of my photos, different tan versus no tan versus different lighting as I'm kind of moving around the hotel and into the venue. And it's all relatively around the same body weight, but visually it looks very different. And you're like, this one looked like, man, you look 6 weeks out, to this one looking like you're shredded out of your mind. And so you need to understand that. And that's a trained eye thing. And that's why we give you some of these tools in J3U to help you get a step up on training the eye. But yeah, it's recalibrating your peak week goggles. So it's like, okay, this is the new set point of how a tan looks on this client. And that's what I compare off to relatively to knowing at this body weight, that's when they still look their best.
Yep.
And this last show, a show with a client I had, I know he always looks just really washed out flat. And even with the tan, the whole time I'm watching, like, man, the whole time we don't look ready. But I've seen him in good light with how it should be on stage. So I know that's there at that body weight. And the whole time I'm just like, yes, all these pics look pretty bad, but I'm going off the weight now.
Yeah, yeah.
And he goes on stage, get back the photos. I'm like, yes, like right on. Like
we nailed it.
It was nailed because of this. And so I didn't let, that just the visuals getting skewed by poor lighting and tan on to change what I was going to be doing with the client. I think that's a huge one. And that we've all had to come to realize with just experience, and not letting that throw you for a loop is a huge one. Regarding training cardio.
Yeah.
So, this is a piece a lot of people ask about, and Luke did a great job in our peak week courses and training modules of laying out, where a client's coming from and the degree of how much you need to pull back within your training versus not. So we have some different client situations where you have the guy or girl that's been just dug down, where you maybe didn't have the timeline you wanted. And so they're coming into peak week pretty fatigued. So you need to take a pretty big drop off the front end to get them to a low fatigue spot. So that might mean a larger reduction in training volume. If you've been doing 3 sets, we're moving down to 1 set, and then the RIR could be pretty high. And then that same goes for the cardio piece. We might need some rest days in there with just only steps. Where we have another situation, the other extreme, you got someone ready ahead, you've been able to linearly increase food and reduce cardio or steps to where now they're in this just like really comfortable maintenance place, and training is extremely manageable. They recover great. Their lifts are progressing again now. So do I need to deload if someone's in that position? Like, no. We just continued nearly the same training plan all the way into the show. It would just, of course, some slight reductions as we get close to the a few days out. But that's like kind of our two extremes. So what is the peak week training protocol? It's like, well, it's a spectrum depending on where the client's coming from. And if y'all are seeing the trend here, it's all about the assessment of the client and then making decisions based around that. And so with the idea of that on the output side, getting them to a low fatigue state. That's kind of really what we're centered around for the training piece on peak week. And then as far as the muscle retention side, it's like, it doesn't take much to retain tissue. That's not really the idea. Some people bring up, and maybe they'll throw this one to you, Luke, around some mistakes that are made around training, which maybe we talk about, depletion workouts, or pump up workouts, or maybe other things that you see that maybe not have a place.
Yeah, I think really the big one is like the depletion sessions to me just don't make sense. Like, especially if you've been training a certain way, like not only the entirety of all season, but the entirety of contest prep, like there's things we can do from a reps and reserve and a total stimulus perspective to lower it and actually produce a better physique. And you're just emptying the bucket to fill it back up. Like, it's not going to present a better look unless you're like having to push someone to the very end, which is like that one end of the spectrum where you're like pushing someone until the Monday of peak week and then just deloading them the last few days into the show. But that's kind of like the extreme side, right? And I think that's kind of where we need to understand that we build the timelines, and why we preach the timelines is so that the peak week is the easiest thing to manage. And because when you have someone who's ahead and is ready ahead and is coming back up, like Emily King's a great example of this. Like she hit a low body weight of like 61 kilos. John, you've seen her photos, right? Like 63 kilos is like a little too sharp for wellness. Like I'm going to put her on stage a bit up from that. But it's like I've brought her back up with food being pretty high. Like she hasn't had below 300 grams of carbs in like a week and a half. And so she's just pretty much training normal as she kind of heads into the show. I gave her 1 to 2 reps in reserve with removal of a leg press like 4 days out. And she'll do like a modified version of her session on Thursday before the Saturday show. And then she'll walk on stage, and it's just the same training split and pretty much nothing that would be too different. And this is really where I think we don't have to make it special. Like it's just, you don't have to train full bore. Just taper in the RIR throughout the week. And if you do it on the front end by preparing the prep well, that's where you really kind of set yourself up for training on peak week to be super simple. It's so overcomplicated, and it's just, you just beat it on the front end.
Yeah. I mean, our idea here, right, is like front end of peak week, you deplete down glycogen. So in turn, when you could super compensate glycogen, and that's a great idea. A lot of that comes from like the endurance world, where the visuals don't have any application. It's pure function. So you absolutely could load a ton of glycogen in muscle doing it that way. If you looked at some of the more later research around that they're saying like depletion workouts don't even really need to happen. And again, in a bodybuilder, you're already in a relatively depleted state. So you don't really need to deplete farther and dig a hole just to fill the hole back in. But here's the kicker, is that in these endurance super compensation studies, they're not looking at visuals, like what actually looks good on stage. So anytime that I've seen someone like truly like super compensate glycogen, we're really looking at someone that went into that post-show kind of phase. It is not something you could put on stage. More typical is someone that's at a maintenance calorie level and maybe is 1 or 2 meals in with some carbs and fluid, and that's about as full as you could put someone on stage before you start taking detriments to the look of condition. So when I see these protocols where it's deplete, load hard, there's usually having to be a follow back with a further like a refinement day, dry out day, or it's taken so far that you have to use a diuretic to pull the water off from the supercompensation of glycogen, with the idea of like, oh man, we're going to fill out, then dry out, then we're going to be fuller, but it'll have all that inside the muscle and no water outside the muscle. And guys, it doesn't work like that. Like your glycogen water reservoir is not devoid from all the other fluid compartments. So if you dehydrate, you're still reducing water within that glycogen storage component. So you can't just fill the muscle and then dehydrate it, only lose water outside the muscle. It does not work like that. That's one of the biggest mistakes and misunderstandings around physiology that I see made. But a lot of it starts what we're talking about here with this training piece of needing to deplete. So you don't need to deplete. For the aesthetic point of getting someone full enough to go on stage, it's simply getting them to maintenance and seeing how much food in do they really need in fluid to then walk on stage. And we see this so much with our peaks, and watching these weight trends of why we do it throughout the day is to find how full can we get someone before we lose some lines. Colton, our J3U coach, like I've been watching him, and he's come down to a low of like 188, and he could go to bed at 194, 6 pounds up. I haven't even sent you these look to see yet. And there's like minimal loss of anything condition wise, a little bit in the front of the quads. I wouldn't put him on stage with at 194, but man, his back looks like I just pumped it full. Like it's like, it looks like he had a whole off season between these photos. And that's just following a maintenance diet of what I've been doing with them. 500 grams of carbs, has been maintaining his body weight. So now I know how much I can bring him up before I start losing anything. And so do I need all of a sudden to put in 2,000 grams of carbs to load him? Like, no, why would I do that? I already know off this same maintenance diet that he gets plenty full to go on stage. So it's just furthering the point here that, a lot of these protocols of deplete, load, dry, you can do them, but there's a lot of moving parts, and it takes away a lot of days that you could have on peak week to keep assessing the look. Because depletion days, it's going to be hard to assess, right? You're going to have someone look really, really flat throughout the day. You're not going to see their best look. Then you're going to load them, and maybe you catch a good visual and wait around that loading period, but then you're going to keep going back to a Friday, a 1 day out, where who knows where they're going to land. It kind of brings some variability there. And then you're hoping to get them back on show day to that look you maybe found while you were loading them. And so it's just a lot of moving parts and unnecessary of loading to find that look where we could easily do it with just a simplified approach. So I feel like I'm tangenting back on a little bit on the nutrition side of it, but it all ties in with this training piece. And other thing, Luke, around this too is the digestion point.
Yeah,
that would be a big impact too on peak week. And we know a lot of people struggle having bowel movements leading into shows, and with bringing in large amounts of carbohydrate or even shifts in the type of foods that you're using. We see some pretty random foods come into peak week, and I've had people that come to me like upset because they had some food go in and were really bloated on stage. I spoke to a female at the gym that she's like, "Hey, I saw your post," and that's exactly what happened to me. She's like, "I had a burger, like we cut water." She's like, "It sat so heavy, I could not control my waist on stage. I just didn't know why this was happening." And I was like, yeah, this is it. Like, bring in a random food, don't have water that you need for all the digestive processes to work, and your food will just sit there. So, part of this is keeping consistency so you can keep improving digestion if that's an area that you need to improve on. And what we can watch for when we have a more standardized meal plan that we're working through.
Yeah, and it just keeps it so consistent. It's funny, like with Emily coming from Australia, we've switched to foods that are, like we had a couple foods that she was using because she's a more macro-based client that you couldn't probably get here in the States, right? And so we simplified it over into foods from a sodium perspective that probably aren't going to change too much flying from Australia to the States. It's like strictly based off the digestion piece. Like, I don't need my total sodium for the day fluctuating. I don't need digestion changing. Like, I need the foods that are in to be the foods that are in. And so we started talking about this like last week, like, hey, like, let's make sure all the foods that we have in play are just the ones that we can get pretty identical here in the States, and let's not do anything other than that.
People do bring up, like, what are things that I should be cutting out in peak week? Like, should I cut out my whey protein? Should I cut out artificial sweeteners, chewing gum, like whatever it may be? And some stuff has no impact on individuals. Others maybe got brought into prep from just a point of trying to ease the nutrition burden of being in a low calorie state, right? And a general guidance here is that, hey, if you have less variables there, it's going to be easier to troubleshoot. So, 7-10 days out, if you have something that's in your plan that's not contributing to fueling performance, recovery, or essential, you might consider removing it. Especially if you're earlier on and trying to learn this process as more of just a safeguard to not having a variable that just throws you off. So this might be like, I'm having a pack of chewing gum a day with a bunch of xylitol in it and get bloated. Or I had a past client that it wasn't an issue actually till show day, still using like Mio and water. Yeah. And then they were running into like acid reflux. And it's like, so I'm like, going through the questions here. It's like, oh yeah, I still had this Mio, which citric acid in it, which, put enough in, it can cause problems. On top of now more food coming in. So those things that, if it's not like your Mio isn't essential to improving your physique, then it might be things that are just best to remove before you get into peak week. And same thing you brought up here, like standardization of condiments. That's a huge one that I see a lot of variability in. With the means of what you're trying to do in peak week, I would say if it goes in your mouth, you should probably be measuring it. So whether that be your mustard or whatever, so you actually have a grasp on sodium and not letting that sodium fluctuate. And that might bring you to really simplify your condiments if you're having to measure all these different ones out. And you might even consider that, hey, I just want to go with just salt and simplify it even more. But just some things to consider, things that might send off some light bulbs for individuals. Or if you're coaching out there, you're not considering these things, might give some insight of why you might be seeing things happen on peak week that you didn't account for, because if you didn't bring up someone's their mustard intake and ketchup or something, and you give them now double the size of meal that they were at dieting, and they double their condiment usage because they want the same, moistness to their meal. That can cause some problems with fluctuations in sodium. So things to think about with absolutely. Digestion and keeping fluid status regulated could be around that. And that all will help you give clear look at your visual assessment and making those calls. I know we're getting close to our time here, but I want to do touch a little bit on show day.
Oh yeah. As
this one is where a lot of mistakes still can get made, because I know we talk about keeping water up pretty high, and Luke and I, we do have our own individual course pretty much coming out with around peak week in water, just because it is the largest mistake made. But what we do is, like, for the most time, water is about the same, right? But when you do finally find this look of what you like, so you have so many meals that go into a client and so much fluid, and say person comes up from 200 to 202 pounds, and that 202 pounds is what you want to put on stage. You can put in the same amount of food and fluid on show day to get them there, but then you need to hold them there. And that's when we make the fluid adjustment, because you don't need to keep putting in that same amount of fluid and carbohydrate to move their body weight up. So this is when we make that adjustment to reducing it. And then is how we toggle carbs and water on show day, putting in more, pulling it back down. So we keep them within that body weight range. Maybe it's 202 to 203 or something, where we know they look at their best. So do we cut water? We just modify water needs based on trying to hold that visual. And that's how we go about it.
Use the matrix. What do we got?
Yeah, next week, well, we talked about peak week. So what comes after peak week is post-show. So we're talking about, you nailed the stage look, hopefully, since you listened to this podcast. And now what do you do? And so we're going to cover, what do we do the first 7 days after peak week, for immediately after the show to all those days. These are the essential days that are going to set you up for already your next contest prep. So we'll dive in next week. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you then.